everyone, my name is Lily and I'm the book blogger behind Utopia State of Mind, and I'm going to be sharing my most disappointing reads of 2022. I just want to preface this by saying most disappointing, not worst reads of 2022. I will go into each read, explain a little bit more about my thought process, so don't come for me yet, where I talk about why it didn't work for me. So let's just jump into this one. I have to find the note I put on my phone, which I was thinking about like before going to bed one night, and I was like, these books really did me dirty. We're gonna come off really just straight into the fire. Lore Olympus, the graphic novels, the book graphic novels specifically. So that's the first thing I want to get into. I know that webtoon adaptations are very popular now, and I feel like when the adaptation is made into a longer, like a book and not just a webtoon where you can just read the whole thing or read so many, a huge chunk at one time, I feel like it needs to be a little bit more thought out. So here's the story, okay, for me and reading Lore Olympus. So I only read the first volume, and I know that originally in the publication schedule it was supposed to be like volume 1, 2, and I think maybe 3 in close succession, so you wouldn't have to wait so long for each consecutive volume, but publishing, pushed it around with the pandemic. So that's maybe the first reason that I had a little bit of problems, because I felt like the first volume ended really abruptly. So basically at the beginning of the graphic novel, I read the trigger warnings, but they weren't specified into which chapter it would be in, and only after talking to a friend who had read it on webtoon originally, and she told me that these trigger warnings were before the chapter that it was actually in. So I think that's the first thing. And so for me, I read the trigger warnings and I was like, okay, I'm prepared, but I didn't really know when it would happen. And to be fair, that's how even trigger warnings on my review work, except with the timing of the way that the comic books ended. So if you didn't know, Lore Olympus has a trigger warning for, I think, sexual assault / rape. I'm not exactly sure their phrasing, but this incident basically happens right before the volume ends. And in the webtoon, obviously it's a longer thing, so it's not as jarring. But for me, the first time I read it, I was kind of like, whoa. I was expecting it, but I know that this trigger warning in particular is very personal for me. I have very strong reactions to it, and so not knowing when it would happen and then it happening and then kind of just ending, I was kind of like, oh, I don't love how I feel at the end of volume 1. And I guess if I had been able to jump right into volume 2, then I would have gotten a little bit more resolution. And in the webtoon, because I was talking to my friend as well, and we have similar tastes, and she was saying, yeah, in the webtoon, not only was the trigger warning before that chapter, but also there was a lot more to kind of help process that afterwards. I felt like it was really abrupt. And so for me, I just was disappointed because I had been looking forward to it so much. I really like Greek mythology Reimaginings, but I was kind of I feel a little bit like my heart was kind of just stepped on. So it's not necessarily about Lore Olympus per se, but I think the way that it was laid out. So that's kind of the theme for this disappointing reads. So let's just keep going, because if you thought that was going to be controversial, I have a few others that are even more controversial coming up. So let's go on. The next one is Gallant. I've only read a few books by V.E. Schwab, so I'm not a huge V.E. Schwab expert, but I felt like Gallant was so slow going into it. The first 50% was just so slow, and I was reading it in a time, I think around March-ish or so, around release, when I was still pushing myself to continue. And to be fair, after it picked up, I was like, oh, I like this. I like more of where it's going. I see more of the Coraline vibes. I like it much more. But I would like to leave in 2022 very slow beginnings. I don't mind if it's 10, 15, 20%, but 50% That's half of the book. And I was thinking about me as a reader. Like, I was reviewing it, so I pushed through it, but I was thinking, like, me as a reader would be very, very frustrated with how slow it's going, because I think that with YA, we tend to assume that the pickup, or like the hook, is gonna hook you, and it's gonna be like, get off the ground basically going, you know, within the first, let's just say 20%. And so I guess like 50% just felt like more of an investment. And as being someone who wasn't like, maybe it was because I wasn't super, super drawn to the premise, or I'm not a really big, you know, fan or expert of the author. Like, there wasn't anything else that was keeping me reading where I kind of pushed through it, except for the fact that I was reviewing it. So that's my second one. It's not necessarily like disappointment with Gallant as a whole, but as I said, I felt like there was some pacing issues. And this is something that I've encountered, I would say maybe a handful, maybe like 4 or 5 times in 2022. Books that take a very, very long time to pick up. And I know that for me, I expect that more with adult reads. I'm reading an adult fantasy right now, which is like 20%, and there are a lot of characters, and I'm just like, cool, I guess, I get it, but like, you know, I'm waiting for the puzzle pieces to start clicking. And I just don't know if other people also have this expectation, so please leave me a comment below, because I think that this is an interesting juxtaposition between what we expect from certain age groups for the books, especially as there are a lot of things that are becoming like crossover stuff. So what does that mean? But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. The next one is Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. I feel like this is gonna be the most, is this the most controversial? I feel like it might be one of the most controversial opinions. I just feel like everyone I know loved this book. I had been recommended this over and over again. I really love video games. So I felt like this book was supposed to be for me, and it just wasn't. I also read it with a book club, and none of us also really loved it. Like, we didn't really understand the hype, so I felt a little bit more justified. But yeah, I kept hearing all these things from people who were saying that there was such a deep emotional connection to the characters, and obviously everyone is entitled to their own opinion and their own experiences before reading, etc. But for me, this is why I'm including it in this disappointing reads video, is because I had a few books as well in 2022 which had this problem for me, and I felt like there was a lot of distance between me as a reader and the character. And I feel like guarded characters, or characters that themselves are guarded, are so difficult to process, because there are a lot of things that they're like keeping from themselves, that they can't deal with themselves, that they're not ready to confront, and so you never really find out. But for me, if there's a character that I'm struggling to understand, I really use these internal introspection, these consciousness, or conscious, not conscious, what is the word I'm trying to think of? But these like moral dilemmas, or these feelings of guilt, or these there's this bird there. These conflicting emotions. I use that processing for themselves to really be like, oh, okay, I get it, right? There's more going on behind the surface. And for me, I feel like I'm someone who really needs a lot of character introspection in the POVs, like in the characters, and I just felt like it wasn't really there in Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. The next one is Realmbreaker. I think that this kind of talks a little bit about what I was talking about with Gallant, but makes it a little bit more complicated. So Realmbreaker also had a lot of pacing things where it'd be like sprinting and then walking, and then sprinting and then walking, or walking, sprinting. Like, the pacing was kind of all over the place, which I understand, because in real life, like, our pacing is all over the place, like, just for us. So I did understand that. It's also an epic fantasy. It's also like 500-ish pages. It is a chunky book. So I understood that a little bit more. But multiple perspective. I love multiple perspective. I really do. I think there is a limit to it, though. Like, I don't think I would read more than 5 POVs, like main POVs. Like, I really like multiple POVs, but it has to be done very well. And I felt like Realmbreaker, the multiple POVs, especially at the beginning, made it feel so much slower. Like, it made it feel so much slower, and I didn't get who these people were. I think that was the main problem, especially at the beginning. Like 20 to 40% or 0 to 40% when I'm kind of like, where is this going? What is happening? Who are these people? There are at least, I want to say 4 or 5 like main POVs, and at the beginning I was kind of just like, what is happening? And I think that there's a skill to using multiple perspectives that does not make it feel very slow and does not make it feel like it takes forever to get to know a character. And this to me was just like not smooth. It wasn't seamless. I was reviewing this one, so I did read it, and I got it, but like the slowness of the POVs specifically was something that kept occurring. Like every time there would be a break or a slowing down in pacing, there would also be a slowing down, or it would be kind of compounded by a slowing down of perspective. And that for me as a reader made it very hard to kind of get through those slower perspectives or those slower pacings. I knew as well that we were trying to see more of their introspection, but it just wasn't hooking me enough, I guess is my point. So that's like a different issue, I guess. And the next one is Scorpio races. This is going to be another like pet peeve thing. I read Monsters Born and Made first, and then I read Scorpio races. And Monsters Born and Made really leaned heavily into Scorpio races comp. So also Scorpio races is like a book that a lot of people like, recommend, and also it's like an iconic classic of the YA genre, I suppose, like YA fantasy genre. But there were not enough water horses. Like, it's supposed to be a water horse race or races, and there just weren't a lot. I know that in Sean's perspective there were more water horses because I guess Kate is walking around on like a normal horse, but I just felt like there could be more water horses for That's the Thing. Also, I felt like there could be more races because it's like Scorpio races, plural, I'm pretty sure. So it's like, I guess I was expecting more water horses and more races, like more competitions, and there just weren't. So I feel like if that's what you want, if you want more cutthroat, dangerous, deadly water horses, more competition and races, Monsters Born and Made is fantastic. So that was my pet peeve with Scorpio races. The next one was A Dowry of Blood. This goes more into, I think, the phrasing. So in 2022, I also had an issue, or I also had a bone of contention with the difference between retelling and reimagining. I think a lot of things are coming out as reimaginings, but they're being marketed as retellings. So I feel like a retelling, to me, and I'm going to name an example, Self-Made Boys. Self-Made Boys is a great retelling of The Great Gatsby because not only does it keep the general plot structure of The Great Gatsby, it keeps the characters, it keeps like a lot of details about their lives. It feels very thoughtful, though, the retelling aspect, but it increases the conversation. It adds another layer of the conversation and another layer of the analysis by bringing in the perspective of a queer main character, of a person of color main character, and how that sort of builds upon themes of not belonging and themes of kind of like performance and everything that's in The Great Gatsby. But honestly, for me, I was like, I don't feel so bad for you, but it's not that Self-Made Boys made me feel worse for the main character, but I understood it better in a different lens. Like the themes made a more impactful impact on me, I guess. So that to me is a great example of a retelling. I also think that the Fierce Reads, like that series of retellings, is a really great example of it. On the other hand, Reimaginings. The example I want to talk about for a good example of the phrasing of reimagining is Kaikai. So I felt like this is the actual story of Kaikai, which is the stepmother of Rama from the Ramayana, and it's like that's the character and the perspective and the frame, like the context of where it is, but we're going into a different aspect of it, which is not so like strictly based on the Ramayana. That to me is a great using of the word reimagining, and Orbit actually spearheaded that, because I was writing like interview questions. I'll do the link below. And Orbit was like, we're actually going to be using the term reimagining for Kai Kai. And I think that that was a fantastic choice, 100%. I think a lot of people should use it more. So I don't know the official like marketing blurb for Dowry of Blood, except that I'd seen this everywhere, like everywhere. But a lot of the places and the ones that I had seen all kind of talked about it as a retelling of Dracula. And it's not, okay? Let me explain. So I feel like the retelling of Dracula, it takes place from these people who are like investigating Dracula, and looking after the disappearance of Mina, I think is her name. And so while A Dowry of Blood takes a lot of really interesting elements from Dracula, it takes like the idea of Dracula's bride, it also takes like certain elements of the plot later on that tie into Dracula, but it's not a retelling of the Dracula story. It's kind of like Kai Kai, where it takes the perspective of the idea of like one of Dracula's wives, or one of Dracula's like consorts basically, and it takes her story and like a few of the other people or vampires around Dracula's story, and how they're looking at Dracula and also like Dracula's downfall. It's not that I didn't enjoy A Dowry of Blood, I did, but I felt like everyone was telling me it was going to be a retelling of Dracula, and I was expecting like the plot to follow Dracula. I was expecting there to be more explicit kind of references to the actual story of Dracula, and there weren't. And so for me, it's not that I didn't like A Dowry of Blood, but the phrasing of marketing really impacts what people are expecting when they go into a book. And so I think that that is the thread that will go towards also the next book and the last book that I want to talk about, which also just like the marketing. But then if I was instead told a feminist retelling of Dracula, then I'm expecting the plot to really kind of mirror the original. So that is why I felt like disappointed by it, or like misled, I feel like is the better way I should say it. And yeah, it will lead into me talking about the last book that when I talk about, which is A Wilderness of Stars, which to me was billed as a fantasy. It's by Shea Earnshaw. Shea Earnshaw has written The Wicked Deep, Winterwood, which are all books about witches, and it really leans into the witches for the fantasy part. So when I was going into A Wilderness of Stars, that's what I was expecting. I was expecting something similar. At the same time, though, I'm going into the actual summary of it. At the same time, though, it talks about if magic lives anywhere, it's in the stars. That's the first thing it says. But it also talks about Vega refers to herself as the last astronomer. She's the only one who carries the knowledge of the stars. You know, everything like that. So while to me astronomer stars definitely screams science, I was like, oh, maybe it's like a fantastical knowledge, like a power, a magic power, a witch, like that's what I was expecting. But going into and reading A Wilderness of Stars is not like that. Okay, so A Wilderness of Stars immediately makes you feel like Mad Max Fury Road style, like immediately feels like it's kind of like this Western post-apocalyptic vibe where everyone kind of is talking about, has this idea of a society and a world that was better in the past, something big happened and now it's worse. And we're not exactly sure what happened or whatever, but that's the vibe it's going for. And it feels very post-apocalyptic, like very much like something really big happened and now we're back in technology, we're back in sort of like society-wise, you know, we're not living in giant technological cities anymore, we're living in more like Wild West vibes. So to me, immediately I was like, oh, okay, this setting feels very sci-fi, very post-apocalyptic, very dystopia as well. There's like this disease around there, no one really has a cure, and everyone's kind of like, it sucks not to have a cure, right? And they're kind of treating it with like herb water. So, but not like herb water in the sense that like there are medicinal properties to the herb. There are some medicinal properties to the herb, but Vega's father is kind of this guy who goes around giving out cures, but he himself is like, this is not a real cure. Like, I'm giving people hope. That's what I'm giving people. So anyway, moving on from that. This is going to be a spoilery, like 100%. So if you do not want to be spoilered for A Wilderness of Stars, go to the end. Like, just leave the video, I guess, because I'm going to talk about this and then I'm going to wrap up. So I'll leave a timestamp, but just know that this is kind of like the last thing I'm going to chat about. But then, and this kind of goes back to a little bit of the other themes before, Vega's hiding a lot of stuff from herself. The big twist that happens, which is that Vega, so basically Vega's like, oh, my mom died. She was the astronomer before me. I have the map on my back, I guess. So I need to find the architect and we're gonna go, and only they can read the map of the stars that I have, or that's like on me tattooed. So we have to go together and we are gonna like go to the ocean. And we're like, what? Why are you gonna go to the ocean? Only afterwards is it suddenly revealed to us that the entire time Vega knew that at the ocean there was going to be a ship that would take them away. And not like a boat ship, like a ship to outer space. Like, Vega has known, I guess, that there's, the whole reason that they've left is that they see a star appear in the sky, and then her mom's like, time to go, that's the star, let's go. And then Vega, I guess, has known this entire time that means that there's a ship coming from outer space, and so at the time, because we can see it now, they can launch their outer space ability ship to like go and meet them, because they've crashed on a planet and they were supposed to like colonize it / like save humanity by like living on it, but their ship broke, and so this is the only time that they'll be able to like make contact with the other ship, which is 100% sci-fi. Like, I was waiting for there to be a little bit of fantasy where it's like, well, it doesn't work, so we're gonna use magic. Like, no, this is sci-fi. And so I love YA sci-fi, like, so much, to forever. I will love YA sci-fi forever, and sci-fi in general, but like, you gotta tell me it's sci-fi. Just in general. It didn't matter if it was like speculative fiction, and I know that maybe on Goodreads or whatever, like, it's a little bit different, but this to me is like straight up sci-fi. And so I felt super like the rug was just pulled out under my feet in a way that I'm like, feel very passionately angry about, because I'm like, if you told me sci-fi, I would be like yelling this from the rooftops. I'd be so happy. I'd just be like all the way. But then I'm told fantasy, and to me this is like a marketing thing, and I don't know if it's because YA sci-fi is having, like, there's this perception that it doesn't sell very well, so let's just brand it as fantasy. I don't know if that's the deal, that's the vibe, but I don't like it, and so I'm kind of like, I feel betrayed. And yeah, and also like, how am I supposed to talk about this on the internet now? Being like, oh, fantasy, but it's like sci-fi, but I can't tell you why it's sci-fi. You just have to believe me? Like, what am I supposed to do? Huh? And so it's sad because on one hand, I feel so happy I found this. I really liked that element a lot. I like where it sets it up for the future. I want to talk about it, but at the same time, because it's kind of to me misgenreified, I don't know what to do about it. And I feel angry about it, as you can tell. So anyway, those are my most disappointing reads of 2022. I hope that now by the end, if you've gotten here, you can kind of see that it wasn't that necessarily that I don't like these books and that I hate them, but there were elements of it that were disappointing to me. A lot of it is like hype, and that's why it's disappointing to me, because the hype is different, or like the way that the hype is phrased is different. So anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Also, please let me know if you read any of these books, and if you have similar thoughts. I'd love to know that I'm not alone. I'm gonna like low-key throw a little bit of like, if you know, you know. But I almost felt like when I posted this video, I was like, I want to post this video because I want to make sure that anyone who feels like they really don't like a book that everyone really loved, that I want to come out and be really brave by posting this so that everyone else knows that they're not alone and they can also dislike these books where I felt personally victimized. If you know what I'm referring to, yeah. Anyway, I hope you all have a really great reading day, week, month, and start of your year, and I will see you in the next one.